Hi everybody, it's David Riordan and welcome back to the Progressive Christianity Conversation. And today we welcome in yet another progressive evangelical, Doug Pagitt. Now Doug is a pastor at Solomon's Porch, that's a church in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's also a speaker worldwide on subjects on leadership and Christianity and very involved in politics, which we're going to get into. And he's a wonderful writer of books, so check out the link below for all of those. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
Okay, so I used this word at the beginning, progressive evangelical, and it's an interesting term. I mean, I really just heard it for the first time about a year ago because I thought I knew what evangelicals were, and now we have this thing called progressive evangelicals, of which you're one, and you do self-identify as that. So what does that term actually mean to you?
So I do use the phrase progressive evangelical. I use it to identify myself in the social setting of religious movements. I don't use it as a personal identifier, like I don't wake up at the start of the day and say, you know, you're a friend, you're a husband, you're a father, you're a progressive evangelical. It's not part of my identity. But I do recognize that in the landscape of social religious movements, evangelicalism has been in the United States a significant part of its history. And like every other religious movement, there are conservative expressions of that and progressive expressions of that. That comes as a surprise to a lot of people, especially if it's not your own group or your own tribe. Some people don't know that there's progressive Catholics. They don't know that there's progressive Methodists because they may have only known Catholics and Methodists that were conservative. Or the other side, they've only met Catholics who are very liberal on issues and they didn't know that many Catholics are very conservative. And so across every religious tradition, there are expressions that are conservative and expressions that are progressive. One of the reasons I like the word and have tried to use it over the last 20 years is the word because progressive has its root in progress, in contrast to conservation, which is what conservatism is. And I think that the Christian story for my religious life, and I think that the hope of humanity is that we continue to move together in some new ways to explore new possibilities and to live out new stories and new narratives. So I like the idea of progressive. If someone asks me if I'm a liberal, I am quite liberal in my perspectives of things, but that's not as intriguing to me as the idea of progress versus conservation. So I've been very interested in that, and I organize progressive evangelicals and I try to identify them. I've started an organization called the Progressive Evangelical Institute, which is a think tank and academic organization for studying the advancement and study of progressive evangelical thought and action, because I think it's an underrepresented category of Christians in the United States. And I think that matters. Because the storyline that we tell ourselves about the religion that exists in the United States, it's rooted deeply in Christianity. It's not the only religion, but it plays a disproportionate role. And evangelicals play a disproportionate role in the imagination of Christianity in North America. Many people who are not Christian, what they understand about Christianity would be from an evangelical perspective. And what you don't count, you rarely understand. And if progressive evangelicals are not organized and therefore counted along with all the other religious expressions, not only are they not understood, but they're not paid attention to. So there's an awful lot of people in the country, millions of people, who would represent this progressive evangelical perspective who don't even have a self-identifying term to join together with other people, let alone anyone who studies religion or talks about it to identify. And then you end up in a cycle where it's not talked about and it's ignored and its impact is not felt in society. And I happen to think that in the age we live right now, in the time of Donald Trump being the president, and evangelicals of conservative backgrounds supporting him at such a high level, it's time for progressive evangelicals to show themselves as being truly evangelical, to be a pushback and to be some kind of a corrective to the Christian narrative that's coming out from conservative evangelicals.
So thanks for that, because when we think about evangelicals, I think a lot of us think about fundamentalists, and you've, expanded that whole piece out while holding the traditional piece, and it's a particular developmental journey that is, quite interesting that we're exploring with all of you. So we might say that we live in interesting times, and we do, and one of those incidents was the presidential election in 2016, and certainly we all had a reaction to it. So I'm going to ask you, what was your reaction, even election night? What was your first feelings about seeing this almost impossibility take place, which is the election of Donald Trump as president?
I am surprised that now, almost 2 years later, I can still re-feel the feeling of November 8th, 2016, the sickening feeling that I had. I was deeply scared. I pay a lot of attention to politics. I paid a lot of attention to Donald Trump, and I was a deep supporter of Hillary Clinton's election. And I felt very scared. I believed him from the start. I believed Donald Trump when he said he was going to do the things that he made as campaign promises. And it's turned out he has done many of those things and continues to do them. And the Christian and religious support of Donald Trump has been really high. And that's one of the things we're trying to do as progressive evangelicals, is to provide a counterpoint from people who follow in the Jesus-orienting traditions, to say that we don't support these policies for the United States, we don't support them for our own lives, and we want to provide an alternative for those. So that's been a big part of my work, whether it's been in church or in my school or in my own personal life or in the books that I write. That's been the effort that I've tried to engage in. As someone who believes that the good news of God that you hear through Jesus is good for the human soul and the human spirit, it compels me to believe that that has to be common good for all people. That's what it should result in, that the common good is the result of believing in the good news.
Okay, so that's the feeling, Tone, and certainly a lot of us can relate. I think we were all watching and it was so unexpected. In a certain way, we just thought the trajectory with Obama would continue. Whether you were excited about Hillary or not, it just seemed that progressives were sort of on their way, and something else happens, which we're still trying to figure out and deal with. But it was more than just a feeling for you. I mean, you actually had to take a look at your work and say, you know, what am I doing? What do I want to do next? And what do I need to shift around as a result of this happening? So why don't you talk a little bit about that major move that you made?
One of the impacts of the election of Donald Trump for me was I had to ask myself, am I organizing my professional work life in a way that feels like it's the most effective for me? And I made some serious adjustments. I decided to turn up the volume on the number of things that I'm saying, the amount of work that I'm doing, and on the decibel level. I'm trying to say things louder and say more things in more ways. So part of that is work that I'm doing on radio and launching an audio network, and then something called Vote Common Good, which is our effort to barnstorm the country September 6th through November 6th, 2018, and try to inflict a change in our current Congress. And we're trying to do that by engaging all kinds of people, but specifically religiously motivated people who have reflexively voted Republican, but their faith and conscience doesn't allow them to support this administration any longer, or a Congress that's being complicit with the administration. And we want to give them a different voting criteria of voting common good.
We're sitting here on the Vote Common Good bus as you guys get ready for this bus tour that'll take place in September, like you said, to October. And hopefully we'll bring a result on November 6th that we will all like, particularly in terms of the House of Representatives. But can you give a little more detail on exactly what the tour is going to do and what's its strategy to actually try to peel white evangelical votes that might have voted for Trump to vote for Democratic candidates, which is probably something they haven't done in a long time, but they may be feeling that this may be the one time. So tell me a little bit more about the strategy of the Vote Common Good bus tour.
The Vote Common Good tour is targeting 48 congressional districts in 25 states. And we are going to barnstorm the country in buses, RVs, cars, in a caravan of the common good, because we believe that inviting people in their congressional districts to have a different ethic in their voting, to vote the common good, is necessary. In a lot of ways, it's a revival. And we're going to places, many of the congressional districts that we think are most vulnerable to change partisan hands, are in places where there are the kinds of population that of religious voters that we know do not find the Trump administration or the current Republican Party to be congruent with their sensibilities about the country or with their deeply held faith. And we want to invite them to know that they're not alone and to join with other people if they make a vote that's different this year than the kind of vote that they've ever made in the past.
So as you look at what you're going to talk to people about and the conversations that you're going to start and have with these audiences that may be feeling that it's time to do something a little radical in their voting behavior, What are the issues? I mean, it's easy to see as we sit here that immigration's been a huge issue lately, but there are many more issues that the Vote Common Good tour really touches on, and really from a faith-based perspective. You know, what the Jesus community actually sees that the Trump administration is actually attempting to do, and sort of what are the issues that are going to be addressed as you try to convince people that maybe they ought to vote Democratic this one time just to flip the House.
As a progressive evangelical, we care about human thriving and about the common good. You're compelled to by your Jesus following. That Jesus was concerned about the outsider. Jesus said, when you have welcomed those who have been abandoned, you have welcomed me. When you've welcomed the prisoner, you've welcomed me. He said, blessed are the poor. There is a story of Jesus calling us to care about those who have been pushed out, left down, and left behind. And so we have to advocate in every administration for people for whom the system is not working. And our country has not worked for a lot of people from its very beginning. This is not a new story. But at this point, the administration is hostile to so many people and to so many values that are held by religious voters that we just have to go out and do something. These are really unusual times. I've been engaged in politics and think about politics for my entire adult life. I've never seen anything like it because I don't think there's ever been anything like it. We are really in a time that is set apart. So it calls us. This is one of the impulses of progressive evangelicals and Christians of all varieties to say, when there's a need, you respond. That's one of the ethics of Jesus. When I was in prison, you came and saw me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in need, you cared for me. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. There's a need and you meet it. So this revival, this push, this rolling barnstorming across the country is to land in people's towns and to invite them personally to join in a whole new ethic of how we're going to vote and how our spirituality and religion is going to play out for the common good.
Well, that's certainly a large menu of options, and certainly as we hold this notion of what would Jesus do, the classic bumper sticker that we always say, is that you say, what would Jesus do for the poor, as you pointed out, to the less fortunate, to minorities, to women, to anybody that is not part of the main power structure. You know, Jesus' ministry was to those people and not limited to any particular people, but for everyone. So as we think about this, and we're now sitting here, we're in July 2018, the midterms will come in 2018 in November, and then we're going to have the presidential election, and it's going to be here in almost a blink of an eye, which is 2020. So let's just imagine for a second that a lot of what you're intending to do with this movement, and all of you that are involved, let's say that you have some success. What does it feel like on the other side of the 2020 election for the faith-based communities that is actually something about pushing forward in a much more positive way?
The Vote Common Good Tour is not going to stop on November 6, 2018. It is an intentional effort to be long-term and ongoing to help all religious people, but especially those who would root themselves in the evangelical tradition, to engage in the public good and in politics in ways that care about all the issues that matter to us. There have been a number of decades that a lot of people of spiritual interest have felt like they were asleep when it came to their politics. They outsourced it to other people. And one of the things that has happened in the Trump administration is that many people have awakened. They woke up and have said, this is not a world that I want to live in anymore. I think this is going to be a before and after period of time. I hope that churches, that people of good faith will find new ways to engage with one another in greater civility, in greater connection, and in greater conversation with each other as they think about what it means to be a person of faith who also shares a country with people who are so different than they are. It's one of the great promises of pluralism. We are supposed to live with one another, those who are different than us, as our shared citizenry, as people who share a one anotherness. And that's what we're asking people to consider, and we hope that there's a bit of a revival, not only on the political side, because having a Democratic Congress and having a Democratic administration is not going to address all the issues that we need to have addressed. Many of us said these things to the Obama administration and said them in the Clinton administration and said them to Speaker Pelosi. There are a number of things that we know are important and matter, and we're not giving up. because one party took power from another party. That's not the storyline we're playing. We're not in the partisan game, we're in the common good effort. So what we want to do is to invite people to not think about only policy and partisanship, but to think about politics for the common good.
Well, amen to that, Doug, and thank you for taking time out from all your busy preparations, from you and your staff and all the other pastors that are part of the Vote Common Good campaign and movement that is going to go forward in this exciting bus tour that takes place in September and October. And people can go to the votecommongood.com website, get all the details, all kinds of ways to be involved. From actually joining the bus tour to online to the most important thing is actually in the voting booth. And we'll just see how all this is going to turn out. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. It's been very inspiring.